The wind hissed across the face of the night, bending the sign, Hale Ranch, since 1919, as if it wanted to tear the past off the wooden post. I stood on the rise at the head of the pasture, fingers clenched around the controller, eyes on the phone screen smeared with the drone's bluish glow. Down below, a strange pickup coughed to life, doors opening as the survey crew fanned out like shadows, driving red stakes in straight lines, the tips taped with the Sky Mesa logo blazing under flashlights. They called it procedure. In Montana, surveying at midnight means only one thing. Someone just sold your land without asking you. I am Morgan Hale. My heart tightened. The drone dipped low, locking focus just as Vern, my uncle, shook Ethan's hand, a half smile, papers flashing like fish scales in the light. Ty Bennett, my close neighbor, whispered in my ear, "Close in. Keep the frame." I nodded, swallowed a dry mouthful, scared and alert as if drinking a cup of black coffee, because something in my spine told me that tonight, every whisper would turn into evidence. Another stake went in, right by the fence of the grazing lot, straight across the path I've always ridden to lead the cows to the creek. I heard my mother's voice in my memory. The land doesn't speak, but it remembers. The drone kept rolling, recording license plates, faces, time. I brought the drone down and killed the motor, hugged the controller to my chest, and walked down the slope like swimming upstream against a flood. At next week's county board meeting, this footage will play on the big screen, right beneath the town photograph hung since my great-grandfather's time. I will read out every minute, every frame, so that the handshake in the middle of the night has to be heard again with the whole town. And my uncle, the one who taught me to cinch a saddle, will have to sit there, with no way to run. The morning after the survey night, dawn lifted the lid off the mountains as if someone were cracking open a golden door. I gave a whistle, the cows jingled their bells, rubbed heads together, then shivered and veered through the iron gate out to the fields. The smell of damp grass curled with the scent of saddle leather, the rust of the gate hinge, the warm breath of cattle mixing with the first cold wind. The tack creaked as I leaned to check the cinch, my hands still dusted with cornmeal from the biscuits just out of the oven. On the porch, the black coffee thermos sat beside the leather-bound notebook. Turnout, the cows, water trough maintenance, head count North Pasture, branding this weekend. I ticked each item like marking a heartbeat. Here, lease is blood, not paper. Lose the lease, lose water, lose the stock trail, lose the calf season. I reminded myself of that every time the pen touched the page. Passing the water trough, I bent to test the valve, listening to the sound of water filling, the metal surface throwing back the still thin sun. The second trough needed a float replaced. I wrote it on the list, which bin in the shed still held a spare float. Remember to call Ty to lend a hand. At the edge of the North Pasture, I stood and counted, familiar with every hair whirl, every switch of a tail. A young cow was limping. Note a light vaccine jab. Monitor for 3 days. The north fence line had a sagging post, slack wire. I flagged it with a strip of red cloth to come back at noon and tighten. The wind carried a far-off train whistle from town, like a reminder to swing by the post office in the afternoon for the winter hay invoice. No small number, but whether the herd gets through the snow rides on those bales. For breakfast, I sat at the pine-scented table, bit into a butter-rich biscuit, poured more coffee, and flipped the wall calendar. Branding, Saturday 6 a.m. Caldwell driller, check pressure. Renew Creek pasture lease, next month. A photo of my parents was tucked into the calendar's corner, smiling at me, eyes squinting in the sun. They went early. Vern, my uncle, stepped in to handle the paperwork for the time being, and the field work, the herd work, I carried. From then on, the land and I talked in deeds, morning turning the herd out, noon checking water, afternoon gathering strays, evening closing the books. Vern worked a room at the county courthouse, knew the recorder's office, the faces at the bank. I trusted him. Had to, because I can't ride a horse and chase signatures at the same time. But I still kept the habit of photographing receipts, slipping invoices into plastic sleeves, writing dates and times by every call, training myself in the discipline of someone without a safety net. Don't let anything live only in your head. By midday, Ty and I popped the cap on the generator's oil tank, swapped the air filter, wiped our hands on our pant legs, and talked through the weekend branding. Ty grinned, said the cattle were strong this season, the branding would go quick. I nodded, thinking of the list of friends and neighbors coming to help, the pot of chili I'd already seasoned, and the invisible tether that runs between people who live by a herd together. The sun tilted west. I swung by the shed for a roll of fence wire and headed back to the slack post. The wind over the pasture carried the smell of sweat and hot metal. I pulled the wire tight, each notch giving a small tack. The fence straightened, and so did I. I slid the pliers into my pocket, glanced toward the hill where the drone flew last night, like an underskin heartbeat. I didn't want to think about those red stakes with the strange logo, but every time I closed my eyes, they surfaced again. Toward evening, I hosed the horse off quick, tidied the yard, gathered the dropped straw. Inside, a pot of mint tea perfumed the room, the radio low, the news talking about next week's county board meeting. I pulled Dad's chair close to the window and wrote more in the notebook. Bring USB, drone footage, print lease maps, creek pasture plus stock trail, parcel numbers, remember to read aloud, list ear tags, pregnant cows, prove dependence on the pasture. I set the pen down and looked at the grass beginning to turn purple under the dusk. Here, the stock trail is a lifeline, but if I have to use paper to keep that vein flowing inside this land, I will write, I will print, I will read out loud until people hear. And when someone says survey to muffle the sound of a stake driving into my heart, I'll bring dawn, the saddle's creak, the smell of wet grass, and the coming calf season as my witnesses, because this land remembers, and I have never forgotten. The next morning, Uncle Vern again went up to Billings for bank business. No appointment, no invoice, no text. I picked up the phone to call. It rang 4 times and then cut off with a pop, leaving only the sound of wind whistling on the porch like someone blowing dry against the nape of my neck. By noon, I took the herd to the edge of the north pasture, instinctively stopping my horse when I saw brand-new red-painted stakes sprouting in a straight line like a knife slash across the skin of the earth. The tops of the stakes were smeared with wet paint, red resin bleeding onto the young grass. I bent to pick up a strip of flagging tape, the face of the tape printed with the Sky Mesa logo, the corner scrawled in marker Row 3A. Row is right-of-way passage. My heart dropped. Around here, anyone who asks permission stops by the front door, sits at the kitchen table, talks about water and grass. Only someone who wants to swallow you whole plants stakes first and plans to talk later. I photographed each stake, noted the time, noted the bearing, folded the tape, and put it in my pocket. When I got home, I saw on the steps a rigid envelope, the corner printed Sky Mesa Land and Mineral, addressee V. Hale. My uncle wasn't home. The mail carrier had wedged it under the doorstop. I sat right down on the wooden step, raised my knife to slit the edge of the envelope, then stopped. Didn't dare, because it wasn't my name. I only photographed both sides of the envelope, recorded the tracking number, called Ty. Come by for a bit. Bring the drone. Late afternoon. I was mixing feed when Lydia from the bank called, her voice lowered. Morgan, the ranch escrow account just showed a strange right-of-way fee. Who opened a right-of-way file? I see the name of a title company in Billings. I swallowed with difficulty. I didn't sign anything. Lydia sighed. I'm asking because fees like this usually come before something big. I thanked her, hung up, leaned back against the kitchen counter, looked at my mud-smeared boots, thought of what my father used to say. People don't steal land with words. They steal it with lines on a map. Ty texted, I saw a gray pickup running on the common easement on the east side. The plate is caked with mud. I mounted a GoPro. Caught it stopping right at the boundary marker. Someone got out and measured with a tape. I told him to send the file. Then took the leather-bound notebook and wrote a bold line. Date, time, red stakes, Sky Mesa envelope. Call Lydia, Ty's video. The lines of writing felt like nails being driven into the wooden board in my head. That night the wind was strong, the tin roof whispering. I pulled up the door camera, scrubbed back, and clearly saw the morning 3 days ago. A mail carrier set the recorder mailing envelope right on the step. Then Uncle Vern drove up, bent to pick it up, looked around, stuffed it straight into his jacket and drove off. I froze the frame where he turned his head. Eyes that were not those of a man who had just brought home good news. Ty dropped by late bringing the memory card. He sent the drone on a low loop over the common easement, brought back footage of 2 unknown men pulling a line, measuring distance, then Vern and a buzz cut guy, Ethan, shaking hands. The wind whipped up dust, their hands still linked. I felt my throat heat as if someone had just set a kettle on it. They didn't knock, Morgan, Ty said quietly. They set stakes first. I nodded, breathed slow. Out here, that's a declaration of war. The next morning, I took the herd out earlier than usual. The red stakes lay still, defiant. I rode close to the edge, looked toward the distant concrete road where the pickup had left the night before. I thought of next week's county board meeting, the screen hanging on the pine wall, the chair's gavel knocking, order. What will I bring? A file folder containing photos of the stakes, a printout of the account history, notes of the bank call, Ty's drone video, a photo of the Sky Mesa envelope addressed to Vern, and one of my father's old maps, on which the grazing lanes are drawn like hand-drawn veins. What will I say? That the grazing lanes are the lifeblood of this place. That anyone who wants to redraw the herd's path must first look into the eyes of the calves due next season. That if someone has opened their wallet to pay a right-of-way fee, they will also have to open their mouth before this whole town. I turned my horse, gave a light nudge. The cows went first. I followed. The wind carried the smell of distant grass, and in that smell, I heard a reminder. Don't fear the red stakes. Fear what people sign in cold rooms. I pressed my lips together, closed the notebook, and promised myself, everything will be brought into the light. In the morning, I stepped into the county records room, the smell of old paper and printer ink mixing with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Ellie Ruiz, the county clerk everyone calls by her first name, looked up, saw my dusted brown hat and my jittery look, and motioned me to sit. What are you looking for, Morgan? I swallowed dryly. Anything related to Sky Mesa and the Hale land. Ellie typed quickly, the screen showing lines of text cold as early morning frost. Memorandum of Grazing and Access Lease. She printed it out. The paper still warm when she set it in front of me. On the very first line, I saw Uncle Vern's name alongside Sky Mesa. At the bottom was the legal description. Legal description. Like a dry catechism of section, range, tract numbers. Ellie took a pencil and lightly underlined, "Look here." A few lines had been swapped in position, the wording unchanged but the meaning completely altered. My North Pasture suddenly became exclusive access and staging. Roughly, a place to set foot and stage. I pictured the just-seasoned calves, milk still on their muzzles, having to give up the pasture to heavy rigs parked overnight. My stomach cinched like someone twisting a rope. Ellie turned to the next page. This too. The co-owner section had an M. Hale scrawl, like someone trying to imitate another person's hand. I looked at my own name and saw it warped, like in a broken mirror. I never signed, I said slowly, each word dropping onto the wooden table like a stone. Ellie nodded, not consoling, just opened a thick book. The notary log, the record of the notary. The page for the exact filing date was missing my ID number. The stamp below belonged to a notary in another town, an hour and a half's drive away, and worse. The stamping date was a Sunday, a day that office does not work. Ellie sighed, her voice the calm of someone who has seen a lot. Documents don't lie. They only state the truth people assume no one will read. She asked to make more copies, stapled them neatly, affixed a green certified copy seal to the corner, then wrote the file number by hand as if afraid machines weren't trustworthy enough. I lifted the phone and called Ty. Got it, I said. Not just stakes, paper. While waiting for Ty to get there, Ellie pulled another supplemental file, another memorandum sent to the bank, showing a right-of-way fee had gone into escrow, exactly as Lydia had warned. In the margin, a small printed line read, "Rush processing." I asked, what needs to be done to keep them from rolling trucks into the pasture? Ellie made no promises, only pointed to the notice board for next week's county board meeting. Bring all of this, demand a public reading. You have the right. I nodded, thanked her for a patience that required no words. Ty arrived, his coat still smelling of night wind, dark circles clinging to his eyes from staying up late editing. We stood right there in the hallway, spread the records out on the stone windowsill. I pointed at exclusive access and staging. He pointed at the drone frame, catching Vern shaking hands with the guy named Ethan. We fitted the two pieces together like solving a puzzle grown-ups assume kids could never do. See? Ty said. They changed the words before they changed the scene. I gave a humorless laugh. Yeah, because they think no one reads. Ellie handed over another envelope containing the stamped copies. Keep them safe, she said. When you enter the meeting room, set them on the table before you speak. Walking out of the county building, the wind lashed my face as if to remind me to stay awake. I clutched the stack to my chest, the file folder thumping my ribs with each step. In the parking lot, Ty popped the trunk, put the memory card and the printouts into the same plastic box, noted the time, signed his name, careful as if keeping a newborn calf on the first cold day. I glanced again at the faint Hale Ranch, since 1919 printed on the truck door sticker, and said silently to my parents, I will put these papers under the meeting room lights. I will read. And if anyone in the family wants to hear real clear, then that night the whole town will listen together. The wind ran over the fields, carrying the smell of damp grass and a strange feeling. Endurance. I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and found I wasn't shaking anymore, because at last, the truth had enough weight to set down on the table. The bank's letter arrived before the late spring cold wind. A thin envelope, black print, a tone cold as steel. Covenant risk due to lease converted to a different use. The ranch's loan may have to be reappraised. I stood right on the porch, caught the smell of damp grass blowing up from the north pasture, heard the mother cows bellowing to each other like a private bulletin of the range. My heart dropped a notch, not because of the big words, but because I understood the small thing being threatened, the calves about to be born, the rhythm of the whole season about to be thrown into disorder just because of a few lines that say, exclusive staging. That noon, the road dust before the gate rose into a blurred strip. Ethan drove up with a whole crew, trucks squealing as they backed. A gray container slid down onto the ground like a cold block. He smiled politely, clapped his hands to point the direction. Staging yard here, in time before calving season, just right. I looked at the jumbled hoofprints on the ground, imagined newborn calves slipping at the steel edge. The smell of machine oil, paint, metal crowded out the smell of new grass. I said, trying to keep my voice even. This is the path the mother herd takes down to water. Move it farther from the north fence. Ethan curled his lip, pulled out a stack of papers. Exclusive staging clause. Have you read it? Vern appeared in his old hat, voice hoarse and thick, eyes not meeting mine. You're just the operator. My name is on the paper. That sentence was colder than the wind. But sometimes words are no longer the only weapon. Breath is what keeps you from collapsing. I inhaled deeply, my hand touching the wooden gate, feeling the fine cracks like age lines. I repeated the names of the cows about to calve. June, Bella, Old Star, like calling my own small unit. Then I turned to the crew. Stop. Get out of the yard right now. The air shattered like a sheet of glass. A few of the men looked at each other, hesitating. Ethan read each word on the paper aloud, his voice ringing like someone trying to prove a truth. Exclusive staging. Access rights. Personnel rights. He pulled out his phone and dialed the sheriff. I stood still, watched the sun get swallowed into a band of cloud, heard the machines go quiet as if the plug had been pulled from my heart. The sheriff arrived, boots muddy, hat pulled low. He listened, looked at the papers, looked at the yard, then spoke slowly. Stop everything for 24 hours. I need to review authority and boundary lines. A fair sentence that still felt like a dull blade. It doesn't cut clean, but it scores the face. News traveled faster than the wind. A few strange cars parked at a distance. People raised their cameras. Whispers swarmed like early summer gnats. Everything paused, temporarily, but the feeling of losing face rose up to my neck. That night, I sat on the porch step, bare feet on the still warm boards. Across the way, the barn glowed yellow. June's shadow stretched long, her belly rocking gently with her breath. I thought about the bank's letter, about numbers to be shaken up just because of the word conversion, thought about the cold container blocking the water path. In the panic of the day, a warm thread kindled. I had chosen to stand on the side of life. Not a slogan, just each small decision so the calves have a path, the cows have a place to lie. Tomorrow I will call the lawyer, call Ellie at the county office, open the boundary map again, run through each line of notes. But tonight, I only lay a hand on my chest, count my breaths, listen to the wind threading through the line of birch trees and tell myself, if I have to lose face to keep the rhythm of life, it's worth it. Because calving season doesn't answer to clauses, it only knows the hand of someone clearing the path for them to be born. After the sheriff's 24-hour stop order, I sat in the kitchen, arms around the still warm coffee pot, looking through the window toward the north pasture where the gray streak of a container stood bare. The midday shame had settled, giving way to something slower. The awareness that I had to go find the truth myself, not noisy, not ostentatious, only solid and clean. The objective was very clear. Prove the signature was forged, the chain of ownership was switched, and the papers had been filed in a dishonest way. To keep the calves a path, I needed more than a feeling of rightness. I needed evidence quiet enough to speak in its own voice. Ty, The boy who loves small airplanes set the new drone on the wooden table, swapped in the telelens and the directional mic. "Let me fly by the book, give notice first, so no one can say we're sneaking," he said, eyes bright like morning. We filed the flight information as required, chose a launch point behind the hay shed where the wind gusted less. When the drone lifted, the sound of the propellers meeting the wind was like a long breath. The camera panned across the fence line, across the tire tracks left on the damp ground. On this land that stretches to infinity, secrets seem like they could blend into the wind, but the camera does not forget. I drove to the notary office listed on the papers. The glass door trembled slightly. A small bell jingled. I turned on the body cam, kept my voice gentle. "Did I come here to sign that day?" The woman behind the counter opened the ledger, flipped a few pages, and looked up. "We're closed on Sundays. And the ledger for that day doesn't have your name." My hand rested on the counter, my palm heating as if I'd touched a pan. I requested a copy of the entries, names, stamp, and times. Details not noisy. A quiet Sunday. A ledger page without my name. An emotionless confirmation, but enough. At the county courthouse, Ellie pulled out a chair for me, set in front of me a stack of printed audit trails. Who had scanned the records? At what time? From which machine? The black numbers on a white background were like footprints on snow. "This helps you see the path of the paper," Ellie said, her voice warm and steady. I took the pages, thanked her, and quietly remembered that I was not alone. The land is vast, but somewhere there are still people who keep the straight grain for this community. Lydia, the bank's escrow officer, called me in the late afternoon. We met at a little roadside diner, the smell of baked apple pie filling the kitchen. She slid an envelope toward me, a statement showing a selection bonus, wired into an account under Vern's name. "It sits right in the middle of the felines," Lydia said softly, like a pebble mixed into grain. I nodded, said nothing more. In a place where people are used to looking one another in the eye, some prefer to speak by invoice. Night fell. Ty took the drone out again. We swapped in the low-noise propellers, turned off all the car lights, leaving only the starlight and the tablet screen washing our cheekbones. On the north pasture, two figures hunched by the boundary stakes, the sound of metal touching earth, a faint clink like a spoon against a bowl. Ty read the coordinates into the mic, each number clear, unshaken. I saw someone's hands pull a stake, tamp the soil back, shift the fence line like redrawing the hem of a shirt. The mother cows watched from afar, their eyes black and round, unruffled. The land remembers where its feet stand. The camera remembers the night's point of view. The next day, I put on an old denim shirt, clipped a small recorder pen to the pocket. I went to see Vern, spoke lightly as breath. "The bank is tight. If needed, I'll sign an extra rider to reassure them." Vern dropped into his chair, studied me like a piece of timber he planned to drive another nail into. "Yeah, you just need to sign the first few letters, like last time I signed for you already." The sentence fell to the floor like a screw dropping from a box, small but ringing for a long time. I kept my face even, nodded, picked up the papers, said I'd take them home to read carefully. Out the door, I stood in the sun, hand to my shirt pocket, feeling the slim pen tremble once like a heart just escaped a tight chest. In the afternoon, we gathered everything on the table: aerial photos, the coordinate audio, the notary ledger, the filing trail, the statement, and the slip of the tongue. No need for grandiose words. Each piece spoke its own part. In the sound of wind threading through the slats, I heard my own sentence again in my head. In a place that stretches to infinity, secrets seem to blend into the wind. But the camera does not forget. And not only the camera. The land does not forget footprints. The water does not forget its course. And people should not forget which side they stand on. I am not hunting anyone. I am only naming the truth. So the calves have a way. So this season still multiplies in the old pattern. And so tomorrow morning, when the sun comes up through the birches, this kitchen will smell like coffee again, not like fear. After days as tangled as a bird's nest, the pace of life slowed the way people start fixing roofs after a storm. I set a pot of coffee at the corner of the table, spread out the papers as if laying a new road, the legal description of the parcel, the old conveyances, the boundary map from my grandfather's time, and a blank notebook. I crammed the dry language called chain of title, the chain of ownership passing through generations. I redrew it like sketching the land's family tree. Who received from whom, in what year, for what reason. The graphite arrows linking one another helped me see where the line broke, where an off-key signature slipped in. Then I practiced reading meets and bounds, describing boundaries by distance direction. Beginning at the monument, go north so many feet, turn east to the creek, follow the birch line. The more I read, the more I began to hear the cadence of the words, as if the land were whispering dictation to me. I called the local Stock Growers Association and signed up as a member. The coordinator's voice was warm like a towel. We have a basic legal guide, an attorney hotline, sample letters to banks. You're not alone. They emailed a packet, how to preserve evidence, recommendations for working with appraisers, and a list of names of those who've been through it. I printed it, clipped it into a hard folder, labeled it backstop. Amid the stamps and clauses, what eased my shoulders most was the quiet presence of those who had gone before, speaking with experience rather than slogans. Ty, for his part, leveled up like a diligent student. In the mornings, he tailed my pickup along the gravel road, keeping the drone at a height just right not to bother anyone. He switched on tracking mode, mounted the mic, set timestamps on the footage, captured clear plates of every unfamiliar truck crossing the north bank. At noon, he swapped batteries, checked the memory cards, logged wind and light. Some days, the wind shifted suddenly. The drone bucked hard, and Ty calmly brought it back, like reeling a mischievous kite into his palm. I watched his silhouette against the sky, recalling what he'd said the other day. Fly by the book, and the data will speak for itself. I smiled. Yes, and that's also why we have to fly with care. Sheriff Crow met me at the office. Deputy County Attorney Kendra was there too. The room smelled of freshly printed paper and black coffee. We laid everything out on the table. Aerial photos, coordinates read into the mic, the notary ledger entries, the filing trail, statements, the bank letter, even the 24-hour stop report. Kendra took notes sparingly, but to the point. We need a foundational record, clear, clean, continuous. No need for noise. The sheriff nodded. Each piece has to fit like a straight-run fence. I added the chain of title diagram I'd drawn, the pencil still dusty. Kendra studied it, tapped her pen. Preserve every original, make copies according to proper protocol. The overlaying of names here is the key. Those days pass like a silent montage. Morning, reading meets and bounds by the sunlit window. Noon, labeling file folders, calling the hotline to ask how to speak with an appraiser. Afternoon, following Ty out to the edge of the field, practicing counting the rotor beat and safe distance. Evening, bringing documents over to the sheriff, listening to Kendra review every detail that needed filling in. Each small task was like a stitch mending my torn surface. Careful, even-handed, unhurried. The mother cows kept ruminating in the pen, their bellies rising like a new moon. I laid my hand on the thick folder and felt my heartbeat settle. In a place where it seems the wind could erase every trace, we learn to let paperwork remember for us, let images speak for us, let straightforwardness become a spine again. And when a day closed, I realized I wasn't just fixing fence, I was fixing trust. A week later, the oak hearing room of the county courthouse was lit from early morning. The faint smell of wood polish, the scrape of chairs, the scuff of boots on the floor. Townspeople filled the long benches, some clutching hats, some holding notebooks. I sat on the plaintiff's side. Ellie set the case file neatly. Lydia held a thick envelope. Sheriff Crow nodded to Deputy County Attorney Kendra, both their eyes steady. On the other side, Vern leaned back, eyes bloodshot. Beside him was Sky Mesa's lawyer in a black suit. And Ethan sat upright, hands clasped as if trying to appear calm. I took a slow breath, laid my hand on the cool oak tabletop, thinking of the calves outside the pen this morning, still chewing grass gently as if they knew nothing at all. When the board chair struck the gavel, the room seemed to hold its breath. "We'll begin the evidentiary review," he said. Ellie plugged in a USB, and the big screen came on. Exhibit A appeared, a nighttime clip, a vantage point from above, two figures hunched at the fence line. Ty had locked the time. The coordinates were read clearly on the audio. The camera zoomed in. Vern's face came into view under a sweep of flashlight, his hands pulling stakes, replanting them, the boundary markers shifting like a crooked seam. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, then fell silent. Exhibit B, a photo of the notary log and a sworn statement. On the screen, the words appeared. Sunday. The office is closed. Did not meet anyone named Morgan. The notary's voice, calm and clear, played over the speakers. I sat still, hearing each word drop to the floor like small stones heavy enough to keep a stake upright. Exhibit C. Ellie moved to the printout of the filing audit trail. The IP line was clear, matching the network address of Sky Mesa's law office. Ellie pointed with a pen, her voice even. This filing was not submitted from the ranch. The lawyer on the other side tilted his head slightly, but said nothing. Exhibit D. Lydia opened the envelope, and Ellie laid the paper on the document projector. The screen showed the line, option bonus, transferred into Vern's personal account. Not the ranch account. Lydia read slowly, without adding a word. The room murmured again. Someone sighed. Someone shook their head. Exhibit E. Audio captured from the pen on my shirt pocket. Vern's voice rang out dry and quick. You just need to sign the initials. Like last time I signed for you already. Everything stopped there. As if the clock hand had just skipped a beat. Sky Mesa's lawyer stood, adjusting his tie. That road is our historical access. Ellie's expression didn't change, and she held up a 1947 map. Paper, yellowed, creased edges. This is a non-exclusive right-of-way, she said, pointing to the thin line. It does not permit staging. No one gets to monopolize the region's common way. The sentence was quiet but firm, like a brace under a table to stop the wobble. Vern sprang up, his chair tipped. My family built this place. I stood too, not raising my voice, just looking straight at him. Our family, Uncle, and you sold it by yourself. The room jolted with silence. I felt my hand still flat on the wood, heard my heartbeat return to normal like when I give the cattle water in the morning. The board withdrew for a few minutes. I looked through the window frame. The late afternoon sky was the color of straw, sunlight drifting across the pasture like a thin cloth. When the board returned, the chair held a sheet of paper, his voice not loud but clear. The board recommends an urgent submission to the district court to void the recording of the memorandum for fraud and misrepresentation. At the same time, we refer the entire file to the county attorney's office to consider forgery of signatures and false filing. No one applauded. There was only a long exhale from a corner of the room, and the clerk's pen running down the page like a stream finding its proper channel again. People stood, chairs rubbing into a gentle wave of sound. Sheriff Crow set a hand on the back of my chair. "Keep going, one step at a time." Kendra gathered the files, looked at me. "Keep every original exactly as we instructed the other day." Ellie smiled. Lydia nodded, and Ty in the back row held the drone controller in his hand, like a warm stone. I touched the oak tabletop lightly once more and turned away. Out on the porch, the wind carried the smell of new grass. There are afternoons when people don't win. They simply give the truth back its name. And that was enough for tonight. For my kitchen to warm again because of a fresh pot of coffee, not because of fear. Morning at the county courthouse. The courtroom for land records opened early. Oak gleamed dimly under the lights, the smell of new paper mixed with floor polish. I sat behind the row of benches, my hands closed over my knees. When the judge finished reading the findings, he looked up, his voice calm as a lake, ordered the memorandum nullified, directed the recorder's office to attach a notice of invalidity to the file, and terminated all rights Sky Mesa claimed under that document. Across the aisle, their lawyer said nothing, only clenched the stack of papers. A tap of the gavel, very light. Yet I heard it like a latch pulled from a wooden frame long stuck. Leaving the courtroom, I went with Ellie to the recorder. She powered up the machine, scanned the court order, created a notice of invalidity entry, and attached it directly to the chain of records. On the screen were simple, clean lines of text, like a stream just cleared. "Done," Ellie said, then handed me a printout with a red seal. I took it, felt my shoulders drop half a centimeter, as if the burden had found the place where it properly belongs. In the afternoon, Deputy County Attorney Kendra brought news. The prosecutor's office was filing criminal charges. For Vern, forgery, using deceit to obtain benefit, and tampering with public records. For Ethan and Sky Mesa's representatives, criminal mischief, planting false boundary stakes, and collusion. Sheriff Crow took on serving the papers. I stood in the hallway watching them do their work, neither elated nor angry. There was only the sense that everything was returning to its proper track. Justice is not a cheer. It is the steady footfall of the shoes that serve this community. A few days later came the civil phase. My attorney presented crisply. Attorney's fees, the interruption of operations right in calving season, extra pay for the vet and laborers, damages from the waterway being blocked, and repairs because the fence line had been tampered with. The court recorded it and ordered the party that caused it to compensate. No number is pretty enough to cover the anxious days, but each line of reimbursement is a stitch, mending the torn fabric of the ranch and of me. Then it was the bank's turn. Lydia called while I was watering the cattle. "Morgan, we've lifted the risk flag," she said, her voice like a long breath released. "The file notes fraud cleared. The reappraisal request is canceled, and the terms returned to what they were. We've also filed the court order and the notice in the loan file." I leaned against the trough, listened to water slap the wood, and felt that the small things, interest, term, notes, suddenly returned to being a calm foundation for life instead of a shadow hovering overhead. Late in the day, the gray container was hoisted off the yard. The ground beneath it left a rectangular welt, blank as a page torn from a book. Ty stood at the fence line, folding the drone, carefully wiping dust from the lens. The sheriff drove by, lifted a hand in greeting, and Kendra sent a short message. "Keep all originals as is. We'll handle the rest." High above, thin clouds drifted over the ridges, sunlight soothing the patches of grass that had been crushed. The mother cows returned to the familiar path to the water. The calves wobbled after them, legs still shaky but eyes already bright. At night, I sat on the steps, a ceramic mug steaming, listening to the kitchen breathe evenly. The whole day narrowed into a few images. The red seal on the notice, the judge's gavel, the crane's sudden rumble, Ellie's faint smile, Crow's nod, and Lydia's call. I thought of the final line I would say in the video, as if to myself, as if to the pasture behind the house. On paper it's void. Here, among wind and grass, it is breathing again. And I truly heard it, a breath no longer smelling of fear, only of new grass and warm wood, ordinary enough to be precious. That morning, we started from the corner stake. The county surveyor stood beside us, tape and GPS in hand, his voice steady like an anchor. The deputy sheriff stood witness, recording the minutes. Ty held the stake. I pulled the tape, step by step remeasuring the metes and bounds according to the certified 1947 map, then drove the stakes back into the exact old trace of ground. Each hammer blow touching the earth felt like an apology to the field. When the fence closed the boundary line again, Ty screwed in the "no trespassing" sign, the small decisive sound of metal. The wind carried the smell of new grass, slipped through our jackets, as peaceful as calves nuzzling their mother's sides. We signed the boundary handover record with the county surveyor. As the ink had just dried, the sheriff's vehicle slowly stopped at the road's edge. Vern, hands cuffed, walked across the grass. I didn't look long, only caught at the corner of my eye a final pan of the lens tracking the white car turning onto the gravel road, dust rising into a thin trail and then settling. Rodeo night. Round lights hung high like moons, dust and hay smelling of summer. I stood behind the wooden rail, heard the announcer call my name and invite me up to receive the stock grower's plaque for defending open range lawfully. I held the wooden plaque, heavy enough for the miles already traveled, light enough that my hand didn't shake. In the rows below, Ellie waved, Lydia smiled, the sheriff nodded slightly. Kendra touched her chest as if to say, done. Ty raised the drone controller like a small salute to the sky. Back home, I set the plaque on the kitchen shelf, poured a mug of hot cocoa. I spoke to the camera, my voice unhurried. In a place as wide as the sky, justice doesn't ring loud, it simply stays. And that is how we go on. Have you ever seen someone sell a family pasture with just a single piece of paper? Comment ranch if you want me to release the footage captured in their absence. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories.